I have been reading Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Phenomenology das Geist, for a couple of months here. I have not been reading it linearly or regularly, so I'm sort of just treating it like popcorn a little bit. You know, read a little bit here. Maybe I want to hear about reason. Maybe I want to hear about the Lord Bondsman situation over there a little bit. I was reading that today. The thing that I've gotten the most out of, that I was probably reading the closest at the time, was the preface on scientific cognition. And there's a number of ideas that Hegel presents to the reader that they're very interesting, and I want to talk about them a little bit while I'm sitting here doing nothing. I'm waiting for an inspector to come and look at some water lines, and we got 3 guys and 2 vans working at the moment, so I'm sitting here and I brought my book. Figure I might as well talk for a little bit because you know. Anyway, yeah. One, you know, the notion of the notion is pretty forward within Hegel's work, and the way that I view the notion, and you know, again, I'm not exactly obsessing over all the bits and pieces of everything being exactly the way that they should be. You know, I listen to a lecture every now and again. I listen to Monday lectures by the, he references Hegel often, Julien de Medeiros. He's an actual professor. And he talks about, you know, Hegelian, and talks about Zizek and Zizek's take on Hegel pretty regularly. So if you want actual teaching on Hegel, I'd go to him. This is just me sort of flailing about randomly, but the notion of the notion, as far as I can see it, is sort of like Hegel's basic building block of thought, where it's the notion of this, the notion of that. Yeah, within, you know, and when you have every notion integrated together into a sort of system of thought, that's how you get to the concept of absolute knowing, which I have not read yet, but yeah. And I'm also aware of Hegel sort of being the originator of like existentialism, for example, which I thought for a while that Soren Kierkegaard was the father of existentialism. And I was into Kierkegaard and reading Kierkegaard for quite some time, because I was into existentialism for quite some time in high school, and now I you know, like the sort of what you think of as the existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, you know, mythosisyphus sort of stuff, which is technically absurdism, and technically Camus distinguishes absurdism from, anyway. Hegel actually predates Kierkegaard, and he sort of initiates the notion of existentialism. He's not an existentialist, but the notion of existentialism is sort of birthed in Hegel, and because he's working from such a top-down position in philosophy, I think he probably does that a decent number of times. Like, I know, for example, Marx, when he was basically busy more or less creating the field of economics, references and is, you know, at least working with within the concept of dialectics when he's referencing dialectical materialism as a foundation for Marxism. So whether you agree with Marx or not, like, Marx is sort of initiated by Hegel because Hegel is working on the notion of the notion, the philosophy of philosophizing. He's focused on, like, the phenomenology of Geist, which Geist, not necessarily spirit, some people translate it as mind more broadly, and I think that's probably a more accurate thing, because um, a more accurate synopsis or translation of Geist in the way that Hegel uses it, because he's very clearly talking about cognition and reason and consciousness, which we don't necessarily think of as aspects of spirit, which is sort of this ill-defined, you know, vague gesturing toward various things. We think of, you know, we think of mind as being the thing that possesses these things, mostly. Whatever, philosophers argue, tell me I'm wrong, go for it. But anyway, all of that is to say that I have been reading, and I lost my place in the preface. By the way, it takes so long. It's kind of funny, honestly. This book has a foreword, a preface, and an introduction before you're starting to read point A, then point B, then point C, and so on. I don't know. That's a very philosophy book thing to happen. Anyway, all of that at roughly 7 minutes, I think it says on there, of talking was to preface me talking about this one point on page 9 of my copy, the A.V. Miller translation. And I'm just gonna talk about this and say what I think about it. I have it underlined here. And this is Hegel introducing his system and his, you know, his approach to defining the phenomenology of spirit. And so here it is, what I have to comment on. When the knowing subject goes around applying this single inert form to whatever it encounters, and dipping the material into this placid element from outside, this is no more the fulfillment of what is needed, i.e. a self-originating, self-differentiating wealth of shapes, than any arbitrary insights into the content. Rather, it is a monochromatic formalism, which has only arrived at the differentiation of its material since this has been already proved. Rather, it is a monochromatic formalism which only arrives at the differentiation of its material since this is already provided. This has been already provided and is by now familiar. So, what's happening here is Hegel is telling us he has this top-down system for all of philosophy, and he's imagining a subject who comprehends this system and has achieved absolute knowing and is in this sort of alchemical, I mean, it's very alchemical, you know, literally, he's using the phraseology of dipping the material into a placid element. And so his concept here is that his theory is able to subsume all things and sort of transform them, basically. But he is, I think, right here, my interpretation of this preface, and maybe if I read the analysis it would be a little bit more poignant, but what he's essentially saying is his theory, he's almost qualifying his own theory as saying, like, okay, this is not really that much more useful or that much more grand and dramatic than simply understanding the object, you know, in itself. Like, nothing is added to the object in this moment, essentially, you know? And he uses the term monochromatic formalism. So something monochromatic is like, you know, monochrome is like things that are gray rather than like a rainbow or something like that, you know? That's my understanding of what this term is. And formalism. So we're sort of bringing everything into this gray vision. This for me, uh, um, it makes me think of if you've watched Better Call Saul and you know about the use of color in that show, and the use of monochromatic, black and white imagery. That is the time in the show when Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, Victor, whatever you want to call him, Victor St. Clair, that's what he is. When his life is collapsed to a sort of unity, and the excitement is gone from life, and the dynamism is gone from life. But this is a sort of false formalism, basically, and Hegel is almost acknowledging this. It seems like, where the sort of formalism of things ends up being like a, you have the feeling of understanding, but you don't actually encounter the world. You only encounter the world through the layer that Hegel, the ideology that, if I may be so bold as to use that word, that Hegel has put up here. And so he's referencing the notion that his all-knowing, absolute knowing is basically like only one mode. And he's sort of alluding to, as far as I would interpret that, and maybe I'm just reading things into it of my own ideology, but he is essentially reading into a sort of multimodalism as an ideal sort of aspiration of the mind. So yeah, that's my interpretation of that passage. I'm sure that I'll be absolutely trounced in the comments, and that is what it is. But I don't know. Cool. All right, I'm done. Ooh, my feet fell asleep.